At the company meeting, a man threatens to kill his boss.
I swear I will kill you.
The man was dragged out by security guards. Unexpectedly, the boss died in the afternoon, and he was even the first to arrive at the crime scene. The man thought it was a prank. He immediately pulled the knife out and found that the boss was really dead. He quickly wanted to put the knife back, but due to his actions earlier in the day, he believed he was the prime suspect. What should the man do? Let us explain. Starting with the morning, this man is named Nelson. He kisses up to everyone at the company, saying hello to everyone he meets, all in order to be promoted to president. He even married the eldest daughter of Mr. Nagel, the boss. He thought he would certainly be the new president. He didn't expect that when Mr. Nagel announced the new president, Mr. Nagel would point to Ken, who sat next to him, and appoint him as the new president. Mr. Nagel had a simple explanation. It turns out Mr. Nagel had a younger daughter he loved more than his eldest daughter, and Ken was engaged to his younger daughter. Nelson was furious. How could a man have a favorite among his own daughters? He has been bowing to Mr. Nagel all these years. Was Nelson a fool? But Mr. Nagel didn't care about that. Listen carefully. Ken's the new president. After saying that, he started laughing at Nelson. Nelson was so angry that his face turned red. He made a death declaration on the spot.
I swear I will kill you.
Then he was dragged out by security. Back in his office, Nelson burst into tears. Nelson decided to go to Mr. Nagel and have a discussion. Nelson walked into the boss's office. Mr. Nagel stared straight at him and ignored him. Now Nelson got angrier. He went crazy. The next second, Mr. Nagel hit his head on the desk.
Ah! Ah!
Nelson walked closer to check on the boss. He had a knife stuck in his neck, but he thought it was a prank. It must have been a fake knife. Maybe it was a switchblade. He pulled the knife out, and then he realized, oh God, it was a real knife. He had blood all over his hands. It was a murder weapon. He had to put it back. Nelson was ready to put the knife back in his neck, but after he aimed, trembling, he failed to insert it. He had to push. Nelson tried to push it in. After several attempts, he gave up. Nelson was covered in blood. He grabbed the knife and rushed out in a panic. His colleagues outside the door were shocked. Then he ran all the way to the front of everyone. Dozens of people were looking at him, but Nelson calmly put the knife into his pocket and swaggered through the crowd. Nelson thought he had killed Mr. Nagel, but how could he walk out of the office covered in blood? He took off his underwear in the elevator, then covered his nose. When he saw people, he said he was having a nosebleed. He continued to muddle along like this. He stops the elevator with one bloody hand. No one in the elevator paid any attention to him. The knife fell to the floor with a clang. The old man next to him, who was looking at the scene, picked up the knife and returned it to Nelson without any fear. Nelson hastily denied it. I didn't drop it. The old man said, I saw the knife fall out of your arms. Nelson could only put the knife away again. At this moment, the real killer came out from behind the curtain. He passed into the ventilation duct, disguised as a water delivery man. He escaped. Nelson left the elevator and saw the security guard who was waiting at the door. Nelson continued to pretend to have a nosebleed, and finally made it out of the building. At this time, the police also arrived. Nelson quickly hid in an alley. He bumped into the killer. It's you. The killer was at the scene of the crime, and met Nelson. Guys, he was also quite fast. Nelson then came to the bridge. This killer wanted to destroy the tools of the crime. He threw the knife into the river, and it happened to land in a police boat. He had absolutely no luck. Nelson was so scared that he fell to the ground in a panic. In fact, the police had already seen the surveillance video of Mr. Nagel's office. They knew who the real killer was, and were already chasing the criminal. Unaware, Nelson thought he was wanted by the police. When he saw the police, he hid in the garbage can. After a nap, he wanted to go out, but the police were goofing off outside. It was late at night and the police still hadn't left. It seemed like they were having a concert outside. Nelson could only survive until the second day. He wanted to withdraw some money and run away. He inserted his bank card. The screen said, "Good evening, Mr. Nelson." Nelson rushed to hide. No. How did the ATM know it was him? And his name was displayed. What if they found out? He threw away all his bank cards and wallet, and was left with only $20 in cash. He found a bathroom to clean up the blood. He tried to buy a ticket to Mexico, but he found that he didn't have enough money. He had to take off his watch and exchange it for a ticket. At this point, the killer learned through the news. There was surveillance in Mr. Nagel's office. He was already wanted. He quickly contacted his employer and demanded triple the fee and a passport. He also had to flee to Mexico. The killer stole a Jeep. On the road, he turned around and saw Nelson. The killer is running for his life. He turned his head and realized he was being followed. He stepped on the gas and ran away. He didn't realize that Nelson couldn't see him, even after cleaning up his eye boogers. At that moment, the radio was playing. The killer was fleeing in a stolen Jeep. The killer was even more sure that Nelson was tracking him. Nelson was trying to sleep when the driver woke him up. The ticket he exchanged for his watch only went so far. Nelson was left in the middle of nowhere, hungry. He had to eat some wild fruits. He picked another mushroom, and almost died from poison. He didn't have to go far before he saw the stolen Jeep. Nelson happily got into it. He didn't know that this was the car that the killer had left. Nelson arrived at a hotel. He covered his face on purpose. The owner asked him to register his name. Nelson made up a ridiculous fake name. He called himself Callicranstenson Hillmanton, and read it to the owner. Sadly, this left a deep impression on the owner. Sure enough, the owner noticed the Jeep, and immediately called the police. After taking a shower, Nelson found. Yesterday's newspaper reported the killer was fleeing in a Jeep. Nelson was confused. How can the police be this efficient? He just stole the car this morning. How did they know about it yesterday? Even placing it in the newspaper. What should I do? Nelson banged his head against the wall. He didn't know the killer was living next door. At that moment, the police siren sounded. The hotel was surrounded. The killer was surrounded by police. What could he do? Nelson had a brainstorm. He came out with a bath towel on his head, pretending to wipe his hair. He was about to get through. The owner came forward to identify him. The killer thought the police were there to arrest him. He rushed out and shot at them. Then he landed firmly with a flip. He dodged all the bullets the police fired at him. Nelson took the opportunity to run away. Hearing the sound of gunfire, he thought they were shooting at him. Like a snake, he managed to get away. In his mind, he thought, these police officers' guns must not have been good. On the way, he met a train. Nelson found the right moment. He did a beautiful somersault, but tumbled off the train. He got up quickly to catch up with the train, and managed to hold onto the train, but the train stopped. Nelson took the opportunity to climb on the train. At that moment, the killer also rushed over. He was confused when he saw Nelson. To be able to follow him all the way, Nelson must be an FBI agent. No, I have to find a way to kill him. Nelson was hungry. The canned food from the carriage was all he could find. He ate. When the staff opened the carriage, they found Nelson lying motionless between the empty cans. It turns out that these cans were expired. Nelson with food poisoning was sent to the hospital. When he woke up, he stole a set of clothes and tried to run away. The killer disguised himself as a doctor to kill Nelson. He was about to do it. Then the police appeared at the door. Nelson hurriedly grabbed the newspaper to cover his face. The patient tried to grab the newspaper from him, curing the patient's crooked neck by accident in the process. But the police were not looking for him at all. The police went straight to the killer pretending to be a doctor, asking him to save their colleague. Nelson took the opportunity to escape. The killer sent the man to his death with a single electric shock. The police didn't even recognize the killer, and comforted the killer. You did your best. Can't blame you, the police said. The killer took the opportunity to run away. Thirsty, Nelson wanted to drink some water, but he didn't expect the water to be poured on him. He finally made it to the side of the road. He got a ride with Lynn. Lynn is very warm and hospitable, but she did have a little problem. Nelson told her that everybody has a few problems. Unexpectedly, in the next second, Lynn passed out. Lynn was driving the car. He did not expect that she would faint in the next second. The car hit the railing head-on. Fortunately, nobody was hurt badly. Nelson just had a little head injury. It turns out that Lynn suffers from narcolepsy. She could fall asleep in a second anytime, anywhere. Lynn insisted on taking him home to fix him up. When Nelson heard that he could go back to her house, he was excited. Maybe he could get close to her. It was hard to get back to Lynn's house. The railing of Lynn's house is in disrepair. It looks like Lynn hit it a lot. Lynn clumsily bandaged Nelson. She sprayed the spray directly into Nelson's eyes, and picked up a rag to wipe his eyes. To apologize, Lynn asked Nelson to stay and fix the railing. Nelson was very good at his job and soon repaired the railing. Lynn's father came home and was very satisfied. But when he closed the door, the railing fell down like dominoes. Lynn's father opened a bank. Nelson immediately said he was a master of economics. Lynn's father hired him right away. The next day, Lynn confessed her love to Nelson. Nelson confessed to Lynn about his identity as a wanted criminal. He didn't notice that Lynn was asleep again behind him. The owner of the farm in town wanted to buy the bank, but Lynn's father was determined not to sell. By chance, the farmer saw the news and decided that Nelson was a wanted criminal. He incited all the residents of the town to make trouble at the bank. Lynn's father immediately asked Nelson if he was the killer. Nelson denied it right away, but then he said, "The police think I am the killer." All the residents were stunned. At this moment, the killer also sneaked into the bank, ready to take advantage of the chaos to kill Nelson. Then the police also rushed to the bank. Lynn covered Nelson and together they were able to escape. Nelson and Lynn took a bus to escape. but the killer caught up with them in the service area. In order to protect Lynn's safety, Nelson wanted to break up with Lynn and let her go. The sad Lynn gave Nelson 2 slaps. At that moment, the killer pointed his gun at Lynn. Both of them were under the control of the killer. The killer asked Lynn to drive. He didn't know. Lynn had narcolepsy, and she could fall asleep at any time. On the road after looking at the newspaper, Nelson realized the police already knew who the real killer was. He didn't have to run at all. At this time, Lynn fell victim to her illness again. She hit her head on the steering wheel. The killer's head was hit with a big bag. The killer took them into the amusement park to meet with his employer, but it was Ken who came. Nelson looked at Ken. He thought he was here to save him. He didn't realize that Ken was the one who hired the killer to kill Mr. Nagel. He wanted to take Mr. Nagel's company for himself. The killer got the money and wanted to escape through a secret passage. Ken quietly hid a gun in the door panel. He picked it up and shot at the killer, but the killer shot Ken dead instead. Ken's body was stuck in the entrance of the secret passage. It was impossible to get out. At that moment, the police also arrived. The killer took Nelson and Lynn as hostages. Said to the police, "I have your FBI agent. Nobody should dare shoot." As a result, the sniper took the shot, hitting the killer's shoulder. The killer was enraged and wanted to kill the hostages. Nelson suddenly attracted the killer's attention. Lynn took the opportunity to press the killer's wound. The killer fell down. Luckily, he grabbed the door panel. Nelson reached out to save him, but the killer's clothes are not strong. Once pulled, it broke. The killer fell down. Finally, he was caught, and Nelson and Lynn can finally be together. That's the end of the film. This film is called The Wrong Guy. This issue's question: do you believe in the saying, "A fool is blessed with a fool's luck"? Comment 111 if you believe, and comment 222 if you don't believe. K believes. My friend is a bit slow in the head, and is not very smart, but when he plays PUBG, he often wins rare skins in his first attempt. He is incredibly lucky. This film is good. K recommends everybody watches the original film. Remember to like the video, follow and subscribe. We'll see you next time. Bye.